I couldn't believe what I had just discovered. Standing there, staring at my mother's phone, I saw a notification from a family group chat, a chat I was never added to. The words on the screen hit me like a cold slap in the face. They were calling me an emotional parasite. The realization left me breathless. I had worked so hard for this family, gone out of my way to help everyone, yet here I was completely excluded, belittled in the one place I thought I belonged. It wasn't just the words that hurt, though. It was the realization that, no matter what I did, no matter how much I tried to fit in, I would never be enough. I had spent years pretending it didn't matter, but it did. And now, the truth was impossible to ignore. I thought back to all those family gatherings, the ones where I showed up late, always apologizing for my absence, and no one even seemed to notice. I'd find a corner to sit in, quietly slipping into the background, hoping I wouldn't draw attention to myself. It was a familiar pattern, one I had grown accustomed to. But what hurt the most was the complete lack of acknowledgement. I was there, but I wasn't really there. No one noticed when I entered the room, and no one noticed when I left. That particular evening, my mom's birthday, I was running late because of work. When I arrived, I was met with nothing but silence. No greeting, no warmth. Just a distant, polite nod. The laughter and chatter continued around me, but I felt like I was invisible. Even when I tried to join the conversation, it was as if I didn't belong. The only seat available was in the corner, far from everyone else. I sat down, pretending not to mind, but inside it crushed me. Why did I even try? Then came the gift exchange. I could barely contain my surprise when I opened mine. It was an old, worn-out handkerchief. I couldn't help but compare it to the lavish gifts everyone else received, gifts that seemed to symbolize their place in the family. But me? I received something I could barely call a gift. It wasn't about the handkerchief. It was about the message it sent. They didn't see me as a part of the family. To them, I was an afterthought, a distant relative who could be forgotten. I could feel the tears burning behind my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. No one needed to see my weakness. Not now, not ever. But inside, something was breaking. I had spent my entire life trying to prove myself to them, always giving, always doing for them. And for what? To be excluded? To be mocked behind my back? That night, something inside me shifted. I couldn't keep pretending that this wasn't hurting me. I was tired of being the one who was never good enough, the one who was always left out, the one who was only ever seen when they needed something. And then I found out about the group chat. They had one without me. They had been sharing everything in there, making decisions, laughing, talking about their lives without a care in the world. And I wasn't even included. That was the moment I knew I couldn't stay silent anymore. But what they didn't know is what I planned to do next. As I sat there holding that handkerchief in my hands, I couldn't help but look back on my life and wonder how I had ended up here. A lifetime of feeling like I didn't belong, of constantly being overlooked and underappreciated, had led to this very moment, the moment I discovered just how little I meant to my own family. But it wasn't always like this. There was a time many years ago when I thought things would be different. I used to believe that if I just kept trying, if I kept being there for everyone, I would eventually be seen, eventually be loved the way I longed for. But now, looking back, I could see the pattern. I was always on the outside, never quite fitting in, always struggling to gain a place at the table. Growing up, my siblings were always the center of attention. They were the ones who excelled, the ones who were celebrated, the ones who could do no wrong. And then there was me, the one who tried so hard to keep up, the one who worked tirelessly to be good enough. I watched as my siblings received praise for their achievements, while I stood in the shadows, quietly hoping that maybe, just maybe, someone would see me. But no one did. No one saw me except to compare me to them. My older sister, Emily, was the perfect child, the golden girl. She was smart, beautiful, popular, everything that I wasn't. And no matter how hard I tried, I could never measure up. My parents would always talk about her achievements with pride, bragging about her grades, her talents, her friends. I wanted so badly to be a part of that conversation, to hear them say something positive about me. But it never came. I was the quiet one, the one who stayed in the background, too afraid to speak up and too afraid to fail. Then there was my younger brother, Daniel. He was the troublemaker, the one who always got into trouble but somehow still managed to charm everyone around him. He had a way of getting out of trouble, of making everyone laugh, of being the life of the party. And despite his mistakes, my parents always forgave him, always made excuses for him, always gave him another chance. Meanwhile, I was the one who did everything right, the one who never got into trouble, the one who followed the rules, and yet it never seemed to matter. And what about me? I was always the one who had to prove myself, who had to go the extra mile just to be seen as worthy. But no matter how much I did, how much I gave, it was never enough. I remember the first time I really understood that I wasn't seen the way my siblings were. It was my 15th birthday. My parents were busy with work, so they forgot it. I didn't mind at first. I figured they were just busy. But when my sister and brother came home, they were all smiles, carrying presents for each other. They didn't even look at me. No happy birthday wish, no card, no nothing. I stood there, feeling invisible, my heart sinking. The next year, it was the same thing. My birthday came and went, unnoticed, unacknowledged. But it didn't stop there. It was every family event, every holiday, every moment when the family was together. I was always the afterthought, the one who was never truly included. As I got older, things didn't get better. I worked hard to keep up with my siblings, to prove myself to my parents. But there was always this invisible barrier between us. And no matter what I did, it never seemed to matter. My accomplishments were dismissed, my opinions were ignored, and my efforts were taken for granted. The hardest part was realizing that no one cared. My parents didn't care. My siblings didn't care. I was just there to fill the gaps, to do the things no one else wanted to do. I was the one they called when they needed help, the one they expected to always be there, but never the one who was celebrated. I wasn't included in the group chat, of course. Why would I be? It wasn't the first time I had been excluded from something. It wasn't the first time I had been left out of a family decision. It wasn't the first time I had been ignored. But somehow, this time felt different. The truth was hard to swallow. It was a harsh reminder that no matter how much I loved them, no matter how much I had done for them, I wasn't part of their world. I was just the one who was always there when they needed something, but never the one who was truly seen. They didn't care about me, not in the way that I had hoped. The discovery of the group chat was the last straw, the final betrayal. I wasn't even given the respect of being considered family anymore. It wasn't even the fact that they had a group chat, it was that they didn't even think to include me. It was as if I didn't matter, as if I didn't exist in their world. As I stood there holding that handkerchief, I realized something crucial. I had been living my life on their terms, trying to earn their approval, trying to be something I wasn't. But the truth was, I had never needed their approval. What I needed was to start living for myself. I had been silent for so long, but not anymore. I've stayed silent for years. But this time, I couldn't anymore. For years, I had remained silent, a passive participant in my own life, letting my family dictate my worth, my actions, my emotions. I had spent so much time trying to fit into a world that didn't seem to want me, trying to convince myself that one day, maybe, they'd see me, but that day never came. The more I tried to prove my value, the more they overlooked me. It wasn't until I discovered that family group chat and the hurtful words they had for me that I realized something had to change. The illusion I had been living under for so long finally cracked. It wasn't just the group chat that broke me. It was the culmination of years of being ignored, of being treated as if I were invisible. I had poured so much of myself into this family, into trying to make them see me, that I had lost sight of who I was. But now, standing in that moment, holding that revelation, something inside me stirred a spark I hadn't felt in years. I wasn't just angry, I wasn't just hurt. I was finally done. I had given them every chance to accept me, to love me, to value me, but they hadn't. And now, it was time for me to change the narrative. The truth was, I didn't owe them anything. I had spent so much of my life trying to earn their approval, hoping for something I could never get genuine love and respect. But all I had received in return was rejection, neglect, and a constant reminder that I was never enough. It wasn't just about being excluded from a group chat. It wasn't just about the fact that they had ignored my achievements. my presence, my very existence. It was about the fact that I had been walking on eggshells, making myself small, for their comfort. No more. The first change happened with a simple decision. For the first time in my life, I said no. The requests started to pile up again, little things, but always the same. Can you help with this? Can you take care of that? It was always expected, never asked. I had become the person everyone turned to when they needed something, but when I needed them, it was always the same answer: silence. But this time, when my mom called and asked me to watch my younger sister's kids for the weekend, I didn't even hesitate. No, I said, simply and firmly. The weight that lifted off me in that moment was unimaginable. It was small, it was simple, but it was a declaration of my worth, of my boundaries. I wasn't going to be the one who always bent to their will. I wasn't going to allow myself to be used anymore. For years, I had been the one to sacrifice, to give, to bend. But no more. I wasn't going to be the obedient daughter, the dependable sibling, the one who was always there when needed but never appreciated. I had been so focused on pleasing them, on making them love me, that I had forgotten to love myself. And now, I was done. It wasn't just saying no. It wasn't just about stopping the constant cycle of self-sacrifice. It was about reclaiming my life, about taking back the pieces of myself that I'd given away so willingly, and realizing that I was worth more than the way they treated me. The small changes in my behavior, the refusal to help without thought, the decision to stop participating in family events, unless I felt like it were just the beginning. But they were the most important steps. One of the most pivotal moments came a few weeks later, when I walked into the kitchen at my parents' house. I hadn't planned to stay long, just picking up a few things from my room. As I passed through the kitchen, I overheard a conversation between my sister and my mom. I wasn't trying to listen, but the words caught me. She's always been a burden. I don't know why we have to put up with her, my sister said, her voice bitter. I know, but what else can we do? My mom replied, almost dismissively. She's always here, always needing something. That was the moment I felt something snap inside me. The years of quiet suffering, of being the one who was never seen, never valued, finally came rushing to the surface. I had been nothing but a burden to them, a problem they had to deal with. They didn't see me as their daughter, their sister. They didn't see me as someone who had feelings, who had dreams, who had value. I stood frozen in the doorway, feeling the weight of their words settle in my chest. I wanted to scream, to shout at them, to tell them how much they had hurt me. But instead, I stood still, silent, letting their words wash over me. And in that silence, I made a decision. This was it. I was done. I wasn't going to be their burden anymore. I wasn't going to stay in a family that didn't see me, didn't appreciate me. I turned and left the kitchen, my mind racing with thoughts. I knew what I had to do next. The next step wasn't going to be easy. It wasn't going to be a simple matter of walking away. But I had learned one important thing. The only person who could change the way I was treated was me. The first step was reclaiming my own worth, standing up for myself and not letting them push me around anymore. And that's when I started to plan. In the weeks that followed, I felt like a different person. Every small action, every decision, every step I took felt like a revolution, quiet, understated, but significant. It wasn't a sudden, explosive change. It was more like a gradual shift, one that I could feel deep within my bones. The feeling of standing up for myself, of saying no when it mattered, was empowering. But even as I began to embrace this newfound independence, the old patterns still lingered. I was still part of the family, still expected to show up for gatherings, still expected to be the person they could rely on when they needed something. But I wasn't going to be that person anymore, not unless I was treated with the respect I deserved. I knew the time would come when they would notice my absence, when they would start to wonder what had happened to the girl who always showed up, who always took care of everything. And that time came sooner than I expected. It was the start of the holiday season when the first real test came. My mom called me, as she always did, asking if I would be coming over to help with the preparations. I had been silent on the phone for a few moments, trying to decide how to respond. This wasn't a simple yes or no situation anymore. This was about setting boundaries, about asserting my space, my right to choose how I spent my time. No, I said. my voice steady and calm. I won't be there this time. There was a pause on the other end of the line, and for a moment, I thought my mom might be confused. I had always been there, always helped out, always sacrificed my time for the family, but I had been taking back my life, piece by piece, and this was one of the most significant moments. I wasn't going to sacrifice my happiness for their comfort anymore. You're really not coming? She asked, her tone incredulous. No, I replied. I'm staying home this year. For the first time in my life, I felt a sense of liberation in my decision. No guilt, no shame, no feeling of obligation. I was finally putting myself first, and it felt like a weight lifting from my shoulders. Of course, my mom didn't take it well. In the days that followed, she sent texts, made calls, and tried to convince me to come. It's family, she'd say, guilt dripping from her words. You should be here with us. But I didn't budge. I stayed firm in my resolve. I knew that I had to start protecting my emotional well-being. After all, how could I continue giving and giving when I was never given anything in return? They hadn't given me the love, the respect, or the appreciation I deserved. And yet, I had been the one to give. I had been the one who always showed up, always did the work, always took care of everything. And for what? To be overlooked, dismissed, and excluded from the family's most intimate spaces? Then came the discovery. I had always known that there were subtle divisions in the family, that some of my relatives had closer bonds, but I had never thought it would go this far. One evening, as I was scrolling through my phone, I received a notification that changed everything. It was a screenshot of a family group chat, a chat that I had never been added to. I stared at the screen in disbelief. How could I have been left out of this? How could I, the one who had always tried to be there for everyone, the one who had been the dependable one, the one who was constantly overlooked but still showed up, be excluded like this? I opened the chat, and as I read through the messages, it felt like someone had slapped me in the face. The conversations were casual, but there was one message that stood out. One that made my heart drop into my stomach. It's so exhausting dealing with her emotional baggage all the time. My sister had written, I know, right? She's like an emotional parasite. I'm tired of it, my brother added. I felt like the floor had been ripped from under me. The tears that I had held back for so long finally spilled over, but I didn't scream. I didn't cry out loud. I just sat there staring at the screen, my heart aching. The people I had loved, the people I had sacrificed for, were calling me an emotional parasite. They were labeling me as a burden, as someone who drained them. They couldn't even acknowledge that I had feelings too, that I had needs, that I had been through my own struggles. They didn't see me as a daughter, a sister, a human being with her own identity. They saw me as an inconvenience, someone to be tolerated. I didn't know how long I sat there, numb, letting the words sink in. But in that moment, I knew I couldn't go back. I couldn't pretend everything was okay anymore. I couldn't continue to be their emotional punching bag. The veil had been lifted, and the reality of how they viewed me was clearer than ever. I didn't know what my next steps would be, but I knew one thing for sure: I wasn't going to let them continue to define my worth. I wasn't going to let them control me with their guilt, their expectations, and their judgment. I had to take action. I had to stand up for myself. And that's when I started planning. The moment had finally arrived. My heart raced in anticipation as I stared at my phone, contemplating the steps I was about to take. For years, I had silently endured the sting of their words, the cold exclusion, the constant sacrifice. But now, I was no longer that silent girl. I had been pushed to the brink, and I was ready to break free from the suffocating grip of my family's expectations. The idea of confronting them was terrifying. For as long as I could remember, I had been the one to hold things together, the one who quietly accepted their behavior, the one who kept the peace. But there was no peace anymore. There was only resentment, anger, and the overwhelming urge to reclaim my life. I decided to confront them, but I wasn't going to do it the way they expected. I wasn't going to storm in, scream, or beg for validation. No, I had a different plan. I had already taken the necessary steps behind the scenes. What they didn't know was that I had been slowly preparing to turn the tables, to finally take control of my own narrative. The first step was simple. I made the decision to cut ties. It wasn't an easy decision, but it was necessary. I sent out a message to my mother and siblings, telling them that I wouldn't be participating in any family events anymore, at least for the time being. I didn't owe them an explanation beyond that. They had no right to question me anymore. Then came the real shock. I called a family meeting something that, in hindsight, was long overdue. I told them I would be coming over that evening, and it was time for us to talk. The tension in my chest was palpable as I gathered my thoughts. This wasn't just another conversation. This was a reckoning. As I entered the room that night, I could feel the familiar tension in the air. The looks on their faces told me everything I needed to know. They had no idea what was coming. My mother stood by the door, her face betraying the confusion she was feeling. My siblings were scattered around the room, their eyes darting between each other, trying to gauge my mood. I called this meeting because I can't keep pretending anymore, I began, my voice calm but firm, betraying none of the fear that had once gripped me. For years, I've let you all treat me like I'm invisible. I've sacrificed so much for this family, but all I've received in return is dismissal, exclusion, and judgment. I've had enough. I paused, letting the words sink in. I watched as their faces shifted, confusion turning into something else, surprise, maybe even guilt. But I wasn't going to let that sway me. I had worked too hard to get to this point. I'm not going to pretend anymore. I continued. I found out about the group chat, the one where you've all been talking about me behind my back. You've been calling me a burden, a parasite, someone who just drains the family. I'm not going to stand here and let you continue to treat me like I'm nothing. The room went dead silent. I could see the shock in their eyes as the weight of my words hit them. They hadn't expected this. They hadn't expected me to stand up for myself. I've spent my whole life trying to please you, trying to make you proud. But every time I tried, all I got was criticism. I was never enough. And now, I've realized that I don't need your approval. I don't need your validation. I am enough, and I'm not going to keep putting myself in a position where I'm constantly trying to prove my worth to you. My voice was steady, but beneath the surface, I could feel the anger and hurt bubbling up. I had been silent for so long, but now it was time to make my voice heard. I've already taken action, I said, my tone colder now, like the calm before a storm. I've removed myself from the family trust. I've made sure that everything I've worked for is in my name. And I'm no longer going to be your emotional punching bag. If you want to talk to me, you'll have to treat me with the respect I deserve. I won't be the person you call when you need something, but when you want to acknowledge me for who I am, you'll find me here. I could see the disbelief in their eyes as they processed what I was saying. They had never seen me like this before. I wasn't the compliant, quiet daughter they were used to. I wasn't the one who would sit quietly in the background, just waiting for them to tell me what to do. I wasn't going to be that person anymore. My mother tried to speak, but I raised my hand, silencing her. No, Mom, you've had your chance to apologize. You've had your chance to change, but you didn't. You kept treating me like I was invisible, like I didn't matter. And I let you, but not anymore. It wasn't just the betrayal I was confronting, it was the years of self-doubt, the years of feeling unimportant, the years of feeling like I had to fight for a place in the family. I had put up with so much, and now, finally, I was taking control. The shock on their faces was almost satisfying, but I wasn't done. I'm done hiding. I'm done being the one who tries to make everything better for you. It's time you learned what it feels like to lose someone who's always been there. I'm walking away, and this time, I'm not coming back. I stood up then, not waiting for any more responses. There was nothing left to say. The family I had known was gone. The bond that had tied us together had long since frayed, and it was time to move on. As I walked out of the room, I could feel the weight lifting from my shoulders. For the first time in years, I felt free. I could feel the shift almost immediately. The silence in the air when I left their house was palpable, like a heavy fog hanging over everything. It wasn't just the physical distance I had put between myself and them. It was the emotional divide that felt final, irreversible. In the days that followed, I started to see the cracks in the family's facade. They no longer had control over me, and it was clear they didn't know how to cope with it. It started with the phone calls. At first, they were sporadic, my mother texting me, asking where I was, why I hadn't been around, why I wasn't answering her calls. But as the days wore on, the calls became more frequent. more desperate. It was as if they were searching for a way to fix things, to get me to come back to the family I had always known, to return to my old role as the dutiful, self sacrificing daughter. But I had already made up my mind. There was no going back. I ignored every single one of their messages. I let them sit unread, left them on hold, letting the silence stretch between us like an impenetrable wall. And then came the unexpected, the moment when they realized the full extent of my actions. It happened one evening, just a few days after my confrontation with them. My sister, Emily, reached out. I hadn't heard from her in days, and at first I wondered what she wanted. I braced myself for the guilt trip I knew she was about to lay on me, but when I saw her name flash across my screen, I hesitated before answering. What was she going to say? Was she going to apologize or try to manipulate me into coming back? When I answered, her voice was shaky. I know you're angry, she started, her words faltering. But you can't just cut us off like that. We're family. Her words stung, but it was the tone that hurt the most, the quiet desperation. She wasn't talking to me as her sister, she was talking to me as a member of the family, someone who had always been expected to fall in line. It made me realize just how much of myself I had sacrificed to fit into their mold. You're right, Emily. We are family, I said, my voice steady but cold. But family doesn't get to treat each other like I've been treated. I've been ignored, dismissed, and told I'm not enough for far too long. You all made it clear that I wasn't wanted, and I was always expected to keep quiet about it. Well, not anymore. I could hear her trying to form words, trying to reason with me, but I wasn't in the mood to entertain any more manipulation. I'm done being the one who does all the work, who carries the weight of everyone else's expectations, I continued. I'm done being the one who's always there, who gets overlooked, who gets blamed for everything. I can't live that way anymore, Emily. There was a long pause, and I could almost hear her processing my words. She had never seen me like this. I had always been the peacemaker, the one who kept things together, who played the role I thought I had to play. But now, I was different. I was done trying to please them. I was done trying to make them see my worth. You don't understand, she said, her voice small. You're just going to throw everything away because of one argument? I wasn't surprised by her response, but it did sting a little. She still didn't get it. To her, this was just a family squabble, something we'd fight about and eventually resolve. But for me, this wasn't just one argument. It was the culmination of years of mistreatment, of my needs and desires being cast aside. I'm not throwing everything away, Emily. Emily, I replied, my voice sharper now. I'm finally taking control of my life, and I'm not going to keep letting you all drag me down. Her silence on the other end of the phone was deafening. I wasn't sure if it was because she was processing my words or if she was simply too stunned to respond. Finally, she spoke again, but this time, her voice had lost the edge of confrontation. I don't know what to say, she whispered. I didn't know it was that bad. I felt a pang of guilt, but I quickly pushed it aside. It wasn't my fault she didn't see it sooner. It wasn't my responsibility to make her understand the weight of what I had been carrying for so long. You never wanted to see it, I said quietly. But now, you have to. That night, I reflected on everything that had happened. The family I once knew was now a distant memory, and I was free. Free from their expectations, free from the roles they had assigned me. For the first time in years, I felt like I was truly starting to live for myself, but the peace I felt didn't last long. As the days passed, I began to notice changes, small ones at first, but they were there. My mother and father began to reach out in a way they never had before. They sent messages, trying to bridge the gap, to find a way back into my life. It was obvious to me that they were panicking, that they couldn't fathom the idea of losing control over me. They didn't understand that this wasn't about them, it was about me taking back my life, my independence. I didn't respond. I didn't want to be swayed by their guilt or their attempts to manipulate me back into the fold. But it was hard because for years I had been the one who would drop everything to make them happy. I had always been the one to forgive, to forget, to go back to the way things were, but not anymore. Eventually I heard from my father. His message was simple but direct. We need to talk. You can't just leave us like this. I stared at the message for a long time before I typed my response. I wasn't going to give him the satisfaction of thinking he could control me anymore. I'm not the person I used to be, Dad. and I'm not going to come back just because you say so. I'm not going to keep letting you treat me like I'm disposable. I knew the response would make him angry. I knew it would rattle him, just as it had with Emily. But I wasn't afraid anymore. I wasn't afraid of their disapproval, their anger, or their attempts to guilt trip me into submission. I was standing up for myself, and no one could take that away from me. The days that followed my decision to cut ties with my family were some of the most peaceful, yet also the most challenging moments of my life. I could finally breathe, a feeling I hadn't had in years. It was as if I had been holding my breath for so long, constantly trying to please everyone, constantly being the one who held everything together. But now, I was free. Still, that freedom came with its own set of challenges. The silence from my family was deafening at first. They weren't just upset, they were bewildered. They had never expected me to break free from the role they had cast me in. The texts kept coming messages that ranged from guilt-ridden pleas to attempts at manipulation, trying to convince me that I was being unreasonable, that I was throwing everything away. But I didn't answer. I couldn't answer, because I knew that if I responded, I would be right back where I started, trying to explain myself, trying to justify my choices. I had already done that too many times in the past. I woke up every morning with a sense of calm. There were no more frantic messages to read, no more responsibilities I didn't want, no more pretending to be okay with things I wasn't okay with. I had made peace with the fact that I would never get the validation or approval from them that I so desperately craved for so long. And that was fine. I started to rebuild my life. For the first time in years, I made decisions based on what was best for me. I took time to figure out what I wanted, what made me happy. I had always been the one to put others first, to take care of everyone else's needs, while my own were swept aside. Now, I could finally focus on myself. One of the first things I did was start a new project that I had always dreamed of. I had always wanted to open a small cafe. I had a passion for cooking and baking, but I had never had the courage to take the plunge. But now, with nothing holding me back, I took that step. I found a small place in a quiet part of the city, a cozy corner where I could bring my dream to life. The first few weeks were tough. There were moments of doubt, moments when I thought I had made a mistake. But as the cafe began to take shape, I felt something inside me shift. I had created something entirely on my own. It wasn't perfect, but it was mine. Every morning, I would walk into the cafe and feel a sense of accomplishment that I hadn't felt in years. I started meeting new friends, customers who became regulars, people who didn't know the old version of me. They didn't know about the family I had walked away from or the years of quiet suffering. They just knew me as the person I had become, strong, independent, and capable of running my own business. It was around this time that I received a message from my sister, Emily. I had been ignoring her calls for weeks, but this one felt different. It wasn't a guilt-laden text or a demand for an explanation. This time, she was asking if we could meet. There was no pressure, no expectations, just a request to talk. I debated for days whether or not to respond. I wasn't sure if I was ready to face them, especially after everything that had happened. But something inside me told me that maybe, just maybe, this was my opportunity to heal not for them, but for me. I agreed to meet her at a small park near my cafe. When I arrived, she was already sitting on a bench, waiting. She looked different, softer somehow. Gone was the arrogance, the defensiveness. She looked like someone who had been through her own form of realization. "Hey," I said quietly, sitting down next to her. "Hey," she replied, her voice tentative. She looked at me for a moment, as if trying to find the right words. "I know I hurt you," she began, "and I'm sorry. I didn't realize how much I was a part of the problem. I thought everything was fine, that you were fine, but I was wrong, and I'm sorry." I felt a tightness in my chest. It wasn't the apology I had hoped for, but it was the apology I needed. She wasn't asking for forgiveness. She was acknowledging the truth, and that was enough for me. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel the need to defend myself, to explain myself. I just nodded and said, "It's okay." We sat there for a while, just talking about life, about where we were now, about what had happened in the past. And for the first time, I felt like I was truly being seen, not as the family member who had always been there to fix things, but as the person I had become. A person who had taken control of her own destiny, who had found her own way, who had finally learned to value herself. After we parted ways, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. I knew there would still be challenges ahead, and I wasn't sure if I was ready to fully re enter the family dynamic, but I had taken the first step toward healing. I had let go of the resentment, the anger, the need to prove myself to them, and that was enough. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of change. My business grew. I made new friends. I began to live my life on my own terms. And as I moved forward, I felt more and more confident in who I was becoming. I no longer needed to be the person my family had tried to shape me into. I was finally my own person, someone who didn't need approval from anyone else to feel worthy. My family, especially my parents, still tried to reach out from time to time, but the dynamic had changed. The power had shifted, and though I didn't hate them, I knew that I could never go back to the way things were. I wasn't that person anymore. And for the first time in my life, I was at peace with that. The sun had just begun to rise, casting a soft glow over the quiet streets as I sat in the small apartment I had made my own. The world outside felt so different now. The echoes of my family's rejection no longer reverberated in my mind. They hadn't taken my place. Instead, they had shown me where my true worth lay far beyond the confines of their expectations and their love. I could still hear the arguments, the silent glances, and the weight of their unspoken words. For years, I had done everything for them. I had given, compromised, and shrunk myself just to fit into the life they had carved out for me. But today was different. Today, I was free. I remembered the moments when I felt invisible, when my existence was reduced to nothing more than an obligation or a nuisance. I had waited for acknowledgement, for the words that might finally validate me, but they never came. I was never enough, not in their eyes, and it hurt more than I cared to admit. But now I had come to understand something far more profound than their approval, my own worth. For the first time in years, I didn't need anyone else's validation to feel like I mattered. My life was mine to live. The only person I needed to answer to was me. The decision to let go wasn't easy. For so long, I had tied my self-esteem to my family's acceptance. But I had learned the hardest lesson of all. Peace and self-respect came from within, not from those who only sought to control and judge. I had come a long way from that moment in the living room when I had been told that the house I had bought, the one I had welcomed them into, was not really mine. The look in my mother's eyes when she had said, "The papers don't have your name on them," had cut deeper than anything else. It was as if everything I had done for them was erased in an instant. But now, that moment of betrayal felt like a blessing in disguise. I had stood up, not out of anger, but out of a quiet strength that had been born from years of enduring their rejection. I walked out of their lives, not with bitterness, but with a newfound sense of who I was. I didn't need them to tell me who I was. I knew now. Life didn't need to be a constant fight for approval. It didn't need to be about trying to please others while losing myself. It was about choosing peace over pain, choosing freedom over obligation, and that was the best decision I had ever made. I looked out the window, feeling the gentle warmth of the sun on my face. The world was still turning, and I had my own place in it now. I didn't have to prove anything to anyone. I could walk my own path, make my own choices, and find happiness in the small moments that truly mattered. For the first time in my life, I felt truly alive. I could breathe without the weight of their expectations on my chest. I could finally be myself. I picked up my phone, scrolling through the messages that had once caused me so much pain. There were still texts from my family, messages that asked me why I was distancing myself, why I had chosen this path. There were apologies from my sister, from my mother, trying to fix things that had broken beyond repair. I knew they didn't truly understand. They thought I was angry, but it wasn't anger that had driven me to leave. It was freedom. I stared at their words for a moment before deleting the messages, one by one. I didn't need them anymore. I didn't need to hold on to the past that had kept me trapped in a role I never wanted. I had the power to let go. I closed my eyes for a moment, a small smile forming on my lips. Maybe they would never truly understand the reasons behind my decisions, But that didn't matter anymore. What mattered was that I was finally living my truth. I wasn't the quiet, obedient daughter they had always expected me to be. I wasn't the one who would keep swallowing their hurtful words and bending to their will. I was someone else now, someone who had learned to walk away, to let go, and to find the strength to live without apology. As I stood up, preparing for the day ahead, I knew this was just the beginning. There was so much more to discover about myself, so much more to do. But for the first time, I felt hopeful. I was no longer living for anyone else. I was living for me. And as I walked out the door, the last words I ever said to my family echoed in my mind. I chose peace over proving myself. And that was the best revenge. With that, I closed the door behind me. Not just to the apartment, but to everything that had held me back. A new chapter had begun, one where I was the author of my own story. This is where the journey ends, but for me, it feels like the first step of a much larger journey. I no longer seek validation. I no longer let others define who I am. I have found peace in letting go and in embracing the truth that was always inside of me. I am enough. Family isn't always blood. Sometimes it's the people who see your worth when others never did. And for the first time, I know that I am worth everything. I am worth the love I give to myself.